Enough has been written about the Ji-Tong line in northeastern China for you to have already formed the impression that it's spectacular and perhaps a little bleak in places. So let's take that as read, park the superlatives and concentrate on the line itself and the reason many of you will have bought this programme, the QJ class that worked there until December of 2005. And just to prove that everything changes, especially with the coming of the railway, here are new dwellings springing up amid the bleakness, just like Crewe in the 19th century. And this is what all the fuss is about, a pair of QJs doing what comes naturally in the Jing Peng Pass. You'll be seeing plenty of shots like this in the next 80 minutes, and a lot more scenery. First though, let's figure out where we are. The People's Republic of China, all 9.6 million square kilometres of it, with the capital Beijing tucked into the northeast corner. It's the area north of Beijing that concerns us, an area you'll already be familiar with if you bought our earlier programme, Chinese Takeout. To the east of the capital, a vast assortment of mineral railways, almost all of them steam worked into the 21st century. To the north, running through Inner Mongolia, the Ji-Tong line. This 900-kilometre stretch of brand new railway was opened in 1995. It was funded and built by the Mongolian Ministry of Transport as a kind of a bypass, so the movement of raw materials and passengers could avoid the bottleneck of Beijing. So I guess you could call it the Mongolian Independence Railway. Having said that, there are connections with the China Rail state system at both ends. This programme focuses on what is generally regarded as the interesting bit, the 250-kilometre eastern section from Chebuga to Jing Peng, starting with the stretch from Chebuga to Linksea. A pair of QJs head westbound up the grade between Diaojidan and Yamanyao. These S-curves are commonplace on the Ji-Tong line, partly dictated by the topography, partly to even out the challenging grades. Those in the Jing Peng Pass are the most spectacular, as you'll see later. QJ 7104 and partner near Yamanyao. Around 100 of these machines were bought second-hand from China Rail when the new line opened. The Chinese built 4,700 of them for their state railway between 1956 and 1988, the Ji-Tong locos coming from the later batches. A single QJ near Yamanyao. As the grades are less challenging on this section, single headers were not uncommon in the steam era. performance and timekeeping dictated pairs on the heavier trains. A passenger working at Yamanyao, looking not dissimilar to a British 9F on a rake of intercity stock. Not that such a combination ever existed. Given that the Ji-Tong was built at the same time as some of the French high-speed lines and the Channel Tunnel, you might expect modern colour light signalling at the very least. Nope, semaphores, adding to the general atmosphere of Britain in the 1960s. You may also have noticed the decorations on the front of the preceding loco, a common practice in China, although translating the wording on the boards can be a little challenging. We're told that at least one speaks of excellence, safety and punctuality, and would only have been entrusted to a driver who ticked all the boxes. Conversely, one of our cameramen learned that it wasn't uncommon for the very best drivers to be given the very worst engines, as only they could get them to perform adequately. So, obviously, being good at your job was something of a mixed blessing on the Chinese steam railway. There has also been much discussion about what is actually carried in these lengthy freight trains. Some commodities, like coal and oil, are easy to spot, but much of the traffic is shrouded in secrecy, especially the loads carried in the closed wagons. Then again, it's not always easy to work out what freight trains are carrying in Britain simply by looking at them. But at least we have a Freedom of Information Act. We move on now to Lingdong and its 1,000-year-old pagoda. Legend has it that the structure was built to ward off an evil dragon believed to live in the hills to the south of the town. Yet the structure is mentioned in one photographer's guide as an excellent vantage point from which to film the line. I'm not sure I care to test that. The structure sits high on a hill, guarding Lingdong Station and its yard below. In keeping with British tradition, the station is some 4 kilometres from the town of the same name. During steam operation, locos always stopped here to take on water, and as recently as 2004, some 5,000 tonnes of coal arrived each day for the nearby Tongliao power station. There were also deliveries of zinc and lead ore mined at the same location as the coal, by Ingolo, 150 kilometres to the north. A new direct line to these mines from Daban is currently under construction. One of the decorated locos pulls out of Lingdong with an intercity passenger working. Chimes continue to ward off the dragon, while the pagoda oversees a spot of shunting in the yard below. A pair of QJs struggled to move a heavy ore train away from Lingdong after stopping to take on water. Fully loaded, they each weighed in at between 220 and 250 tonnes, and although it's hard to believe from this shot, at a top speed of 50 miles per hour. Not surprisingly, as train weights increased, the 100% steam operation came to an end in the year 2000 when the first diesels arrived. Those allocated to this eastern section, however, were soon transferred to the new line between Daban and Haoluku for crew training, and steam traction continued on the Chebuga to Daban section until 2005, when pairs of QJs could still be seen every 2 hours or so. The official last steam train worked on December the 9th, 2005, a special passenger train from Daban to Jing Peng, operated by QJs 7038 and 7119. The same two locos worked the last freight train the following day. A single QJ pulls away from Lingdong with a mixed freight of oil and ore. Although book steam had officially finished on the Ji-Tong line, Daban Shed, which you'll see later, retains 5 locos for special tourist services, among them the final 2 to work in anger. While coming up, a rousing approach by 6891 on another intercity service. Darakhiga Crossing, a few kilometres west of Lingdong, where the signalman and his family live in this hut. Their pig lives here, but appears to have gone missing. And this is their larder. Some in the West might happily swap their complicated lives for such simplicity, especially with something like this thundering past the front door. Despite the rural charm, this location is only a few kilometres from the new motorway linking Lingdong city with Daban. Built at a cost 10 times that of the entire Ji-Tong railway, the new road was closed soon after its opening in 2004 following a series of fatal accidents. It should be safe to use about now. Another pair approach Darakhiga after passing a westbound working which will briefly appear in the top left of your screen. A single QJ crossing Darakhiga Viaduct. Chaganhada Crossing, a few more kilometres to the west, is a typical mix of ancient and modern. As for the sign in Mongolian, well, it Could say English photographers go home for all we know. A pair of QJs approach Chaganhada crossing. By Ji-Tong standards, the gradients from Chebuga to Lindong are fairly gentle. This is where the going gets tough, with locos working very hard on the westbound climb to Daban. This herdsman is also working very hard on his personal gradients at Gulamanhan. The summit of this section of line is between Chaganhada and Gulamanhan, about a kilometre east of the level crossing we saw just now. Although westbound locos can take a rest, the eastbound gradient becomes especially hard, briefly, on the approach to the crossing. And to prove the point, yes, well, that was obviously very popular. Gulamanhan also has a water tower, but very few trains stop. The westbound ones are busy accelerating, the eastbound struggling to keep moving. After the short downhill grade and a flat section westbound, the climb soon begins again. Apart from the lack of high-vis, and the language of course, this could be anywhere, proving that comparisons between the West and China are largely pointless when no one has yet figured out a better way to do plate laying. AQJ passes the crossing east of Daban, where we'll be taking a break to show you round the locomotive depot. The layout here is fairly straightforward, apart from the use of the Y to turn locos rather than a conventional turntable. Daban was once home to all 100 of the Ji-Tong QJs. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the fleet is down to 5, which you can still enjoy if you stump up the cash to hire them to work a train. A spot of history at the entrance to the shed in the shape of this ancient 260, which apparently was made in England. I think not. The shed offices have a Mediterranean look to them and a pseudo-Western 4x4 parked by the door. This rather startling statue is a local tribute to the Mongolian horse, a species indigenous to the area and found nowhere else. A real one would be about the size of a pony. In the Ji-Tong steam era, the disposal and preparation of locos on shed was little different to any other steam operation in the world. It was the work and organisation of the crews that set them apart. Long distance work would often keep men away from their families for 48 hours at a stretch, with only a single day's rest before setting off again. Crews were organised into brigades, each brigade typically having 7 or 8 locos. The standard crew was 3 men, a driver, an assistant driver, whose job was to sight signals on the other side of the cab, and a fireman. The assistant and the fireman would usually swap over at each station, as firing the QJs was particularly arduous for one man continually. After booking on, usually some 2 hours before book departure, crews would carry out all the standard checks, attend to oiling and greasing, and perhaps do some minor repairs, even a little welding if necessary. Prior to departure, coaling would take place first, using this antiquated steam crane rather than a modern gravity feed coaling stage. A pair of QJs passes the shed heading west. Meanwhile, another loco moves forward to take its turn under the coaling bucket. The larger 12-wheel tenders could carry up to 22 tonnes of coal, so assuming each bucket load is around 500 weights, that's well, quite a lot of buckets to fill one of these to the top. The large tenders could also carry 50,000 litres of water. If you haven't been metricated, that's about 11,000 gallons. With such a lengthy process, and with so many locos needing a fill, coaling took place almost non-stop in several areas of the shed complex. The Chinese hunger for coal is well known, but the tonnages used by the steam fleet were tiny compared to the consumption of the country's power stations, conservatively estimated at 1 billion tonnes every year. Damping down the coal to stop dust flying everywhere is another time-honoured tradition, but this is fairly conservative hosing compared to the usual practice of emptying many buckets of water into the tender. Water for the boiler was taken on last, usually while the fire was cleaned. Removing ash was straightforward, but shifting stubborn chunks of clinker called for a more robust approach. In the cab, the grate could be moved using an air cylinder. The QJ design was originally American, but it was copied and partly redesigned by the Russians, who later supplied drawings to the Chinese when there was cooperation between the two communist countries in the 1950s. Early attempts to build one, though, were disastrous, so eventually the Russians established a new factory at Ji-Tong and gave technical assistance on an improved and updated version. The QJ designation comes from the Chinese word Qianjin, meaning progress. Another familiar problem of the steam era: what to do with the mountains of ash dropped from fireboxes. Daban came up with a novel solution: shovel into a pit, send in a steam crane to scoop it up, and load into wagons. Move wagons back down the line to Chebuga, where a handily placed brickworks mixed it with local clay and baked it into cheap bricks. Why didn't we think of that? And yes, the independent steam crane behaves exactly like a locomotive. It even has its own chime whistle. And if you're wondering why, having loaded the ash into a wagon, the crane has now dumped it back on the ground in a different spot, well, labour is cheap and plentiful in China. With a population of 1.3 billion and rising, something has to be found for them all to do, like presumably chasing around trying to contain the dust after it's blown all over the depot again. And this is the running office where the crews signed on and off. These characters are thought to represent their daily rosters, allocating routes and locomotives, but they could equally be the lunch menu. Finally, after all that activity, fully fueled and prepared locos line up for action. The original Ji-Tong fleet of 100 was down to 60 serviceable locos by the autumn of 2004. A year later, it was a mere 20, as the diesels made their presence felt. DF4 diesels first appeared in the year 2000. This is a DF4B, one of a batch of 10 which entered service at Daban in November 2004. Not surprisingly, elsewhere in the complex you could find QJs being scrapped. So, in a surprising parallel with Britain, vast reserves of coal in the ground failed to prevent the demise of the steam fleet. It's called progress, which is what the QJs were meant to represent. But our journey isn't over yet. A pair of QJs depart from Daban and pass under the road bridge from which the last shot was taken. And yes, this is the same train. The line out of Daban station has a short downhill stretch before a series of rising and falling grades on the approach to Linksy. You think it's easy to get these shots? Think again. This is the road to Linksy, through an area usually described as a desert. Not that many deserts get down to -16 Celsius in the depths of winter, or have bus services. Apparently this dirt road has now been tarmacked. A pair of QJs approach Linksy. Because of the flatter terrain on this stretch, trains often reach their maximum line speed of 70 km per hour, less than 50 in mph. This was raised to 80 km per hour from 2004 with the coming of the diesels. The most spectacular part of the line runs westwards from Reshui through the so-called Jing Peng Pass, with its viaducts, tunnels and S-bends forging through stunning scenery. During steam operation, almost all trains will work by pairs of QJs, hauling up to 2,300 tonnes at a time. When this section was dieselised in the spring of 2005, maximum train weight went up to 3,500 tonnes. The serious entertainment begins with the river crossing at Rishui, or Galadesitai if you prefer the Mongolian version. Almost all locations have bilingual names, which translate differently into Western characters, but each pair means the same. Rishui, or Galadesitai, for instance, means warm water. Despite the comforting name, this is desolate country, not unlike the early West in America. The climate is extreme. Because of China's unique topography, winter temperatures can be several degrees Celsius below those of the countries in similar latitudes. Fortunately, or not, there is little precipitation in the area. When snow does fall, it's soon blown away by the howling wind. Because of the drought conditions, hardly anything grows here, so it's a bleak spot for these youngsters to grow up. But at least they had the steam trains to amuse them until recently. Given the appalling weather, the Mongolian Transport Ministry hardly needed the challenge of building a railway line over a mountain as well. Short of going straight through it, there was no alternative but to snake around. From Rishui, the route has to climb more than 200 metres in only 10 kilometres. And the solution was to build 2 full loops, resulting in a line running parallel to itself on 3 different levels. The train in the foreground is eastbound, coasting down the grade. The one in the background is going west and struggling. Between them, the river viaduct you saw earlier. From this one spot, it was possible to see the same train for almost an hour as it struggled around the loops and up the grades. At the same location, another train begins its climb in the westbound direction before turning back on itself to head east on the intermediate level. Finally, it emerges from a tunnel and heads west again on the top shelf after completing the double direction switch. This is actually two tunnels called numbers 6 and 7, both around 200 meters in length. At the eastern end of Shangdian Tunnel, another train begins coasting down to Rishui after passing the summit of the climb in the middle of the tunnel. While this pair continue their struggle to the eastern portal with another westbound working. The driver of this westbound working remembers to switch on his headlight before entering the tunnel. This may look all very picturesque from your armchair, but consider the footplate crews hacking at frozen lumps of coal in half-empty tenders. The QJs were fitted with coal pushers, but they too would have frozen solid in these conditions. A view from the top of the tunnel mouth at the western end of Shangdian, as an eastbound working looks forward to taking a breather on the downgrade. At the start of the descent, drivers would shut off steam and begin pumping fresh water supplies into the boiler. So, despite the scenery and the private railway in your back garden, would you care to live here? No, nor me. Yet somehow the local population ekes out a living from livestock and manages to survive the extreme weather conditions. The modern westernised city of Beijing may only be a few hundred kilometres away, but I can't see mobile phones and iPods venturing out this far. Now this could almost be mistaken for Daban Bank in the 1960s. Well, perhaps not. A diesel and steam combination runs down the hill at the Shangdian Loop while heading east with empty oil wagons. This westbound working is also heading downhill after breasting the summit at Shangdian. The destination for all the crews on these lengthy workings was Haoluku, where dormitory blocks and modern washing facilities have been installed at the depot. As for entertainment, there was none, apart from the bar. So until it was time to clock on again, usually after 20 hours rest, there was little to do except eat, sleep and drink, and perhaps watch a bit of TV. Their loco, meanwhile, would be completing a return run to Daban with a different crew. Another pair of QJs tackles the last of the hill at Shangdian while heading east. a similar working at the same spot. The leading loco letting off steam to blow sludge from its cylinders. With the end of Ji-Tong steam in sight, British cameramen who ventured to China made sure to film everything that moved, even if it meant risking life and limb as the wind tried to blow them from the mountaintops. But as we discovered in the 1960s over here, it's too late when it's gone. So we should all be grateful for their efforts in recording this unique slice of railway history. After a hard day at the summit, a proper Chinese meal at one's luxury accommodation. The cuisine is typical northern Chinese, which means lots of seasonal vegetables. Oh good, it's chips tonight as well. And this must be what happened to the pig that went missing earlier.
You missed.
After a hard night's digestion, a footplate ride and a chance to communicate with the crews about what it's really like to manhandle these beasts in such difficult terrain. The two crews communicate with each other by two-way radio and with a brakeman at the back of the train. No, the QJs weren't very pretty, but they did the job and the cabs were surprisingly spacious, as an estate agent might say. Loco 7112 sets off while the driver communicates on the radio. Crikey, steam-operated fire doors. We used to have those on the Southern. Unlike Western systems in steam days, the route to driver was a quick one. 2 years at railway school, 2 years as fireman, 2 years as assistant driver, before gaining the #1 seat. 5 years in total, instead of the 25 it sometimes took to get the top job in Britain. The best students had an even quicker route, straight from railway school to assistant driver. Meanwhile, back in the Jing Peng Pass, another pair wake up the Happy Valley as they head east. This pair emerging from the mountain Erdi are about to cross Brickworks Viaduct. The double loop arrangement at Rishui is repeated at the western end of the Jing Peng Pass, but with an extra kink as the line becomes ever steeper on the approach to Jing Peng itself. The mountain on the north side of Brickworks Valley is known as Hadashan in Mongolian. As for the brickworks, well, it's not a modern building. This was another excellent vantage point, as you could watch the same train for several minutes snaking around the first of the loops before disappearing into a tunnel. From the brickworks end of the viaduct, the train would have travelled almost due north for a kilometre or so before turning left, that is westwards again, into the tunnel. With the Hadashan mountain as its backdrop, a single QJ briefly heads due south before swinging round the loop and crossing Brickworks Viaduct. the apex of the second loop stands Semingui Viaduct, where the line negotiates a 400-metre radius curve. This train is heading eastbound and will shortly enter tunnel number 1. Semingui Viaduct is probably the most photographed structure on the whole Ji-Tong line, perhaps because the bridge bears the slogan, "The railway was built by the people and serves the people," a reasonable enough statement in a communist country, although I wonder how many of the population have trekked out this far to read such an uplifting message. Westbound freight continues its climb to Jing Peng by heading east off the viaduct. And eastbound freight actually heading east before swinging round the extra kink and crossing the main viaduct visible in the background. Something resembling civilization becomes apparent again at Ji-Tong in a quaint rural charm kind of fashion. There are people too, eking a living in whatever way they can. This man is off to shovel clay into his baskets to make bricks, which find their way into surprisingly modern-looking housing. Like all these rural settlements, Ji-Tong has its own station providing a passenger service. Another eastbound freight approaches the town. Several kilometres further west, Gu has its own viaduct on the apex of a loop, which, if anything, is even more impressive than the structure at Semingui. This is the last of the loop arrangements, as the Jing Peng Pass runs out of mountains that need to be snaked around. The remainder of the run to Jing Peng itself is more or less a straight line. Even at this western end though, the upward gradient is unyielding. By now the line has climbed to almost 1,000 metres above sea level, compared to the 400 metres at Chebuga where we started our journey. But this flat valley doesn't run all the way. Parts of the final section had to be blasted from solid rock. 7143 rocks into town with the shortest load you'll have seen in the entire programme. As the main town of the area, Jing Peng has a station to match. And a rather nice painting of the Great Wall in its waiting room, which is slightly incongruous as the wall was built to keep out the Mongol hordes. The area around Jing Peng has connections with Genghis Khan. It's said that he recruited many of his soldiers there. Returning to the present day, the station has 3 main tracks and double water columns in both directions, allowing both train locos to be filled at once, unlike some of the rural locations where the second loco has to shuffle up to take a drink. As well as domestic commodities, these are sacks of grain being put onto wagons, there is also a loading area for the stone ballast mined locally. After their slog through the mountains, a pair of QJs arrives from the east to be detached from the train. In the final years, Jing Peng was the western limit for steam operation. The QJs detached and moved on to Haoluku depot for servicing, while the crews took a well-earned rest after the usual chores of cleaning and disposing. But as I mentioned earlier, the locos themselves would probably have made another return trip before reacquiring their original crews back at Haoluku. Like this pair, setting off for another crack at the switchback. But this is very rare, a pair of QJs departing from Jing Peng westwards as late as November 2004, heading for who knows where. We round off with this shot of two pairs of QJs passing each other at Guillermanhen. And a reminder that what you've been watching for the past 80 minutes is now railway history. If you missed the QJs on the Ji-Tong line, I know how you feel. But the scenery is still in place and there's always the steam-hauled tourist trains to enjoy. All you have to do is scrape together the airfare.